Welcome, folks, to the what is this, June 12th, 2024 Aries Working Group call. It's a Hyperledger call, so the answers, policy, and the code of conduct are in effect. Links in the agenda. The agenda is linked in the chat, or you can find it on the Hyperledger wiki under Aries Working Group calls. Um, any, I think I recognize everyone. Eli, do we know you already?
You do not. Hello, everybody. My name is Eli Wolfson, new member from representing Reclaim Protocol, a decentralized identity initiative.
Welcome. Glad to
Thank
have
you.
you. Cool. I have no announcements since we didn't have this call last week because of EIC. Any announcements that we should have on our list? All right. Any release status or work updates? I know Steven is still over in Europe, and so we might not get an Akapai one unless someone else has any updates.
I've got an update for Aries VCX, Sam. We released just on Monday 0.64.0. So that's pretty cool. A lot in that one, and the last changes from that include the any contributions from being backed by ABSA. So we're gonna I expect the progress to be a little slower than when they were contributing, but we're picking it back up. So
Cool. Good. I'm glad that's continuing. Cool. Thank you, James. Any other updates? Awesome. Okay, so today is like the smorgasbord of topics that we have covered recently. And so one of the things to do is to identify the things that we should be talking about over the next few weeks. As part of that, we have a lot of things kind of in the air, community coordinated updates and stuff. So a little bit of a check in there and also sort of a recognition of status. Again, some of that just because of conference season may be drawn out just a little bit, and that's okay. So we will definitely have time for any topics that folks want to bring up and get on the agenda either for discussion today or in future weeks. So we can definitely do that. So I wasn't going to read all the way through because we have a lot, but it's there on the agenda. And if you have opinions about what we should be talking about or whether it's on this list or not, that is super welcome. Does anyone have any topics they want to throw on the agenda right now or later, which we'll have time for?
Just something that I remembered you pointing out, Sam, in the last DidCom user group meeting. I don't remember what it was, but you mentioned that since we did some work on some protocol or something there, that it'd be handy to mention it here.
I think that's the pickup protocol review that I'm going to ask James to do. Is that ring true?
Okay.
Yeah.
That's probably it.
Cool. Yes. There's also I have to find a link for this. The mediator coordination stuff to change the config of a mediator. This was a gap in the protocol that we identified. And so that we could take a look at too. I saw some chatter about that. I think in the Discord channel. Maybe that was the wrong place. But if anyone, I don't know if Micah or you or Colton have any updates on that you could share as well. That might be useful. We've talked about it previously here.
I don't have any updates on that specific one.
Okay. Let's start with James. Is that okay? Do you want the screen?
yeah.
Or would you?
Well,
Okay.
got that pulled up. I'll throw a link to the PR.
I'll put that in the notes.
That's the wrong window. That's from the Aries VCX call. We'll just do that. So I've opened up this PR for message pickup v4. There's a couple of things here that's motivating this. The largest one, though, being that there's ambiguity within the v2 and v3 versions of this protocol around how delivery of messages should occur in live mode. It was intended that you should continue using delivery messages. If we take a look at the messages, the protocol has a status request which can be returned. A status will be returned based off of essentially the most important thing being how many messages do you have waiting to be picked up from the mediator. You have a delivery request, which is, hey, I would like this limit of messages from the mediator, potentially filtered by a recipient did or key, a did key. And then you actually have a delivery message that gives you a array of attachments that contain the messages from the mediator. And this should be responded to by a messages received. So acknowledgement from the recipient or the holder is the classic example here that says, yes, we got these. You can remove them from the mediator queue, and this ensures that we don't actually lose any messages in delivery from the mediator. The vagueness that was in implementation was around live mode. So live mode saying, we want to connect over WebSockets and receive messages immediately. We don't want to have to do any kind of polling. We want to be able to receive messages in real time. What ended up happening here is that various implementations interpreted this as deliver messages directly with a forward message, not using the delivery and messages received acknowledgement, which means that we lose the guaranteed nature that the protocol gives. That was determined to be a breaking change. So that is the motivation, the primary motivation for this PR. There's a couple of smaller ones. One of the other ones being that DIGCOM or message pickup v3, its primary purpose was to provide the protocol, but only for DIGCOM v2, which is a problem because we're using pickup protocol v2, and that needs to we need this to work for both DIGCOM v1 and v2. So that is another thing that this proposal is tackling, is to provide examples for both DIGCOM v1 and DIGCOM v2. Any questions so far? There's a couple of other notes that I can go over, but figure we tackle clarifications first.
I would like to note that since mediation is a core piece of what we do in Akapai and the other communities, that this breaking change here is actually a huge thing across the board for all the communities using DIDCOM.
And I think that's why we decided to go with make this a breaking change, not update or clarify the existing protocols, because that way it can be a transition versus a updated in a framework, but nobody actually knows if it's been completed in where, for instance.
Yeah, so if you trigger live mode with version 4, the expectation is that you deliver the messages not naked as they were, but wrapped in the same delivery mechanism used for non-live mode, where that was the ambiguity. So this, by doing another version, it allows for both the old assumptions to be true, but still move forward with one that's unambiguous.
Yep, I was just making that note due to the fact that this meeting usually has a lot more people than the DIDCOM users group meeting does. And
Yes.
there's going to be a lot of people listening to this recording. And so everyone who's listening should keep that in mind.
Indeed. Indeed. And then James cleaned up some other stuff at the same time, which was breaking, which was convenient. So the whole thing just gets a little more consistent, which is helpful. Often we queue those sorts of changes up because they're not big enough to motivate a version bump on its own. But when you're doing a version bump, then sort of clustering them together is good.
Yeah.
So that's awesome. James, did you get a chance to stick in the changed section yet? I haven't looked at the PR yet this morning.
I have not. That's
Okay.
that was on my to-do list yesterday, but I forgot to do it. So I should be able to get to that today or tomorrow, and then I'll ping you / Daniel.
Yeah, that'd be awesome. Cool.
Did you want to talk about any of this conversation, or do you think that was really good in the DIDCOM users group, and we should
we
leave
should
that here?
we should recap real quick again for the sake of the recording. Do you want to intro it, or do you want me to?
I'll give a brief intro in that there's two problems here that we talked about. One of them, which I already talked on, is that should we have protocols that can exist in both DIDCOM v2 and v1 across major versions? We could restrict protocols to, for instance, we could add a version number in the URI to indicate that it's only for DIDCOM v1 or v2, but that restricts it when we may not necessarily need to restrict it. So that is one thing to think about. The other being,
and the extended thing there is that when eventually, and this is not an announcement, DIDCOM v3 comes along, how do we handle the move from what might be different in 2 to 3 as part of the same mechanism? So it's the same thing, but looking forward instead of looking back.
yes,
right? If we're tagging, if protocols can only be tagged to a specific version is specifically what I mean. So yeah.
Yep. The other one is more to Timo's actual point here, is that sometimes we can end up identifying issues or things that we need to adjust when we're first introducing a protocol. So for instance, it would have been nice to, when this protocol was first introduced, keep it in some kind of draft mode for a couple of months where we can make breaking changes where there's not an expectation that once it's in the framework, it's production ready. There's some way for us to indicate that, hey, this is still could have iterations to the protocol, but we can still implement and get the implementation knowledge. This gets a little bit awkward in that being able to introduce a protocol starting at 0.1, I think, is a really good mechanism for this, because that's what that's for. But that doesn't work for subsequent protocols. So for, like, in this case, it could be ideal for us to indicate that, hey, this version 4 of message pickup, we're going to mark this as draft for the first couple of months. And then once we feel pretty solid about that, we can move that to be official, just 4.0. Can help us, for instance, if we immediately make it production ready and say 4.0, it's done, and then we run into an issue in 2 months and now we need to make 5.0. But right now, this field is restricted as like a semver field, these 2 digits. So adjusting this any will have implications across all of the Aries and DIDCOM implementations that exist today. I miss anything on that one, Sam?
No, that was really good. But will you, in Steve, if you're not listening yet, this is
I'm
me
here. I'm following.
invoking your ears. Awesome. Can I share, James?
Yeah.
So I want to thank Timo and James for digging up this meta issue. It's on a it's on the thing that it's on a relatively unrelated PR, but it's a really good discussion. So here's what we're talking about. Starting with 0.1 for a new protocol is a good idea, and that way you're like, hey, this is new, we're still playing around with it, but we don't have a way to do that on an upgrade to make that happen, right? You can say, oh, 4 is a breaking change on 3, but there's no way to be like, hey, 4 is in draft mode, because if you do like 4.1, that means it's it's a minor increase on 4. And so to clarify, this can't be something that we really do right stinking now. Like that's because it would break all of the message parsing stuff that we actually have. But what I would love to do is, since we're here, is have this conversation, and so that we are ready when we do have an opportunity to actually put it in. And so we can easily sort of emphasize the best practice of doing a 0.1 initially instead of a 1.0. And I'm guilty of a little bit of that, and so I'll do a better job. But I was wondering about thinking for the future what we might be able to do to make that happen. And one of the ideas that we talked about is having an optional D with a draft number on a protocol that could technically be used on any major minor, and it's considered draft until it goes away. So draft 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, whatever, and then as soon as you take the draft away, then it's the real 3.2, and that allows for people who are playing with draft things in software, which I really want to promote, to a way to designate and differentiate between different draft modes. It's not intended that this get widely deployed until the draft status is done, but it does create a really nice way to sort of indicate what the status is of a protocol that we're talking about. For example, James is just talking about pickup and how to adjust pickup, right? And we think it's a good idea, but it would be really nice if we could declare that this is 4.0 draft 1, and then we could get ideally at least 2 different implementations to implement the thing, apply any learnings that we actually have from direct implementation, and then they can drop the draft status, and it sort of becomes minted official at that version number. Thoughts about this? Notice we're doing semver major minor, and so that's a little different. We're not doing patches different than this. Patches don't indicate drafts, and so there isn't really a direct semver thing that we could do there. I'm not at all stuck on the D, although I think it might be really useful to sort of indicate to people like, oh, like what's going on here. But any thoughts about this? I want to sort of discuss this thoroughly while we have the topic on our minds, and that way we can be ready in the future if we need to make some adjustment to that.
One thought I had after our conversation, Sam, on Monday was that Semver does have an ability to indicate for a pre-release version, kind of like what I threw in chat of the full 3 numbers, but then you can do like a dash alpha dot 0 or a dash draft dot 0. It's fairly flexible in that regard. So if you want to go strictly Semver, I think it provides the mechanisms for that. It would be under 9.
You could even see it in use on the top, -RC1 and RC2.
Interesting. So where's you said like section 9 is there?
Yeah.
Where's section? Oh, there you go. A pre-release version may be denoted by appending a hyphen and series of dot separators immediately following the patch version.
So is that pre-release? I like this because it feels a bit more standard, but can we have multiple draft paths at this time, or does it seems like it starts with alpha, beta, release candidate, published.
It actually doesn't. It doesn't seem to have an opinion.
Okay.
Yeah, what that block there seems to basically say is that anything put in that block is considered a pre-release.
We may want to constrain it more on the DIDCOM side of things.
Well, at the very least, we want to go ahead and standardize things so that, like, draft is indicative of a draft. But I think it would be to future-proof things. It would be wise to not restrict it to a specific set of attributes.
So this says these anything after the dash indicates a pre-release version, which I think gets to exactly what we're talking about. And it basically says it's a hyphen and then whatever.
Yep.
And it says dot separated identities. The interesting one here is they actually have like a dash x dash y dash z. So kind of indicating that you could indicate multiple pre-release flags. And they have a
Yeah, but
lower precedence than the associated normal version, which is also what we were talking about.
it seems to imply sequence. And I guess what I'm wondering is, take for example the pickup thing we just discussed. What if there was two proposals to actually do that kind of ran in parallel, and then at some point we pick one or merge them or whatever? How would we denote that in this notation, given that they might be very different?
If I were to do it, I'd probably do something like dash draft dash first last initial.
Well, it's not a bad way. I'm just wondering if there's an existing canonical way of having multiple paths prior, because that's kind of what we're talking about. Just pre-release implies it will be released to some extent.
Mm-hmm. And I think so. Semver doesn't come from the idea where you'd have multiple branching paths. I don't
Right.
believe. It's more in line with software development where you have one official repo and not like two official repos of the same thing.
I think that the case that you bring up, Steve, might be able to be handled when you have, since we could put any characters essentially after the three digits. You could have one that's called you could do it by RFC number, for instance, like 70789, and then .0 for which iteration of that draft it is.
So I'm looking at number 10. They have a build metadata which is after a plus. So I don't know what this does exactly, but and I think that Colton, you're probably still right in the sense that this is intended to be linear, not branching. And so I don't hate the idea, Steve, but I'm trying to figure out how we can accommodate that. And I think we can probably manage it. The other thing that makes me wonder is that in the future, should we right now we're major minor, and that's what we've decided, which is fine. Part of me wonders if we just should go like straight up Semver within conventions that we apply onto like pre-releases or build metadata or something. And that means we'd have a patch, which we don't currently have because it's major minor patch. But that's another interesting thing that we could discuss. I don't hate this though. I think the pre-release version is better than using a D to designate draft. But what we could do is we could basically we could start with something like this, and we just use the convention of like draft.1 to make that happen. Which could be cool. Maybe we get ourselves into trouble, Steve, but I wonder if we could have a convention of doing like you have like an alternate that you're proposing, and you could sort of designate that as part of the process. But what we might be able to declare is that and it kind of depends on the precedence. So Semver is really good to figure out precedence, right? We might need to declare on things like drafts or alternates that they are to be sort of a uniquely another version and not considered or managed in any other way. And that way we get out of the difficulty of trying to work out precedence between two, two of the alternate, what was it called? Pre-release versions. So that we can deal, and I think that's actually what it says here. Pre-release version. Oh, it just says that has to have a lower version. Yeah, so it doesn't actually say. But I kind of like this idea. Anyway, it seems like this idea is popular in the sense that we should manage a draft versioning, whether it's full Semver or we still do minor pre-release. And pre-releases have a lower precedence than the actual just number itself. And so this is a breaking change for DIDCOM protocol version numbering, which means it's not something we can just slide in trivially. It could be done on top of the existing DIDCOM protocol if we felt like it was important enough, or it can be, and managed that way somehow, or we can just slide it into sort of the next version to make that happen.
Could we,
I think
instead of saying alt, could we say working? Something like that, that's a phrase I hear a lot. I like the straight up Semver because then it'll make sense to people. And this could be like like a branch in GitHub, for example.
it could be maybe we do working like name dot number, and that way like you're saying this is a working thing with a named sort of branch of it, and here's my incrementing number of it, and that would indicate something that people are considering as an alternate. And then draft is more of a serious, like, no, I think this is probably the right one,
Yeah.
type of a thing. And so I think that could be useful. The move to do full Semver rather than just the major minor is a small one. I've never heard a word of complaint about the fact that we don't have patch involved. And so one of the things that we could do is use patch to indicate a documentation update. And then in code, you would simply ignore those, because it's really there. And so the only majors and minors would indicate that there's a code adjustment necessary or possible, depending on whether it's major or minor. And the patch could simply indicate a documentation update on the protocol definition with no code changes needed.
That could actually be a good idea, because then even if you're just looking at the protocol level sort of thing, and you're coding to one specification, and then you're communicating with an API that it increments the patch number, you now know that the documentation has been changed and there's clarification.
Right. And so we need to get people to understand that they can ignore patches from a code running perspective. It's intended to be a developer time flag, basically.
Mm-hmm.
But if we did that, I think that could be valuable. I still think that placing some constraints. The good news is that if we go to full Semver and we allow for this pre-release with a dash, then what it means is that you use regular Semver parsing on this, and if you could just ignore unknown pre-release information, in that sense. And so I think that actually means that it's pretty stable. And if someone shoved banana in here instead of draft or working, it wouldn't break the universe. It just wouldn't be recognized by anybody, and that's fine. Because if this is being used in advance of the real protocol being used, no one's going to have support for 3.2, which means that if they shove banana in here and they ignore the banana, then they're just not going to have support for 3.2, which I think is a good behavior to have, in the sense that it's not destructive or causing things to fail catastrophically. Messages will just be ignored because there's no matching protocol version. So I think that's good.
It also technically allows people to throw in their own terms there for their own internal development while or before they uh, promote it to a draft state and submit a PR.
But if a message leaks out, it's not going to like nuke some piece of software.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yes. Agree. And technically speaking, the build stuff could be used. I'm looking at 10. Build stuff could be used here to no problem. And again, it will still just be ignored. So dropping to full Semver means you can actually use like a Semver library. Not that it's complicated, but you could if you wanted to. Here's the full BNF. And so that's totally possible, right? You can, the version core is the main versions that we promote and talk about, but then we can do pre-release information, and if necessary, build in pre-release information to make that happen. And I think the pre-release gets us exactly the draft stuff that was brought up by Timo and discussed between you and Timo, James. Any thoughts there?
I think it's the exact right step direction to help address this issue. It's the best solution I've seen. The biggest issue is that none of the frameworks support it yet, but that's that's a different problem.
No matter what we do, none of the frameworks are going to support it yet.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. So, yeah, give me a time machine, I'll fix it. Okay. So here's a question, and Steve, this is a little bit leading. Do we feel like this is important to address independently of future updates, or should it just be wrapped into future updates and we continue as now with some best practices, like the 0.1 thing in the beginning?
Oh, you mean break everything now or wait till the next version?
Right. Do we break it now, or do we break it along with all the other things we're going to break?
The more the merrier. Let's do it all together.
Okay. So if someone comes up and feels like this is a super burning issue that has to happen very, very soon, then please like speak up. We've recognized that it's an improvement, but again, this is a change that would be kind of hard to propagate and know when it's propagated without sort of handling a next major version of DIDCOM. We can't do the DIDCOM. I think this is too big to do DIDCOM 2.2 instead of doing like DIDCOM 3 because of how significant of a difference the parsing is, and it would break people that were only doing DIDCOM 2 or DIDCOM 2.1. And so this is a major, from a DIDCOM versioning perspective, this is a major change.
Yeah, I think that's best. We don't want to disrupt people in development right now, but a major version, they'd expect a little disruption.
Yeah. Okay. That's useful discussion. Any other topics there? All right. James, thank you for presenting that and leading us into that discussion as well. Oh, we also need to blame James for something else. Here's an RFC formatting fix that James has submitted that just fixes a variety of RFC's formatting by fixing spacing and other things to make it display correctly. This has been approved by Stephen. Anyone opposed to merging it needs to speak up really fast. Because I'm going to merge this as soon as it can happen. Perfect. Speaking of potential future patch releases on the documentation. Thank you, James, for that. All the other pull requests are ones that we have discussed recently, need to make progress on, but there's known issues or known sort of steps needed on most of those. Okay, more open discussion at the moment. We have a whole lot of topics here that we need to address. There are unqualified DIDs and the out of band DID exchange CCU as well. Any updates that anyone has for progress there? I would note we're like 2 weeks away-ish from the date that we had picked for both of these to move to the next step. And so that's just kind of a reminder, check in with your dev team, see where they are. Of course, we need to adjust that if necessary as a community, but sooner is better than later, generally speaking.
Is
Okay.
it a terrible idea there, Sam, to like put a message on Discord asking for people's deployment or adoption status in case there's people or implementations frameworks who can't be here who can indicate where they're at?
Indicating adoption status as part of the PR.
Yeah, and because you say we're 2 weeks away, but I also actually don't know how likely are we actually going to hit that? Are people even aware we're trying to hit that in the next 2 weeks?
Right. That's a good suggestion. If you know anyone that can't regularly come, or if you're listening to this call recorded, then note that PRs for adoption status are welcome to both 793 and 496 for those transitions. And that way there could be a signal. You can also drop stuff in chat, but please do make noise, and that's helpful. And I think that would be good. One of the things that strikes me is that we have discussed an interopathon, and it would be, and these two things are definitely on the list to sort of highlight as being done and demonstrated done at that event. And the idea there is that this is a public demonstration of accomplishing the steps required for both of these transitions. There's other things that we can test as well, but that would be hugely useful in making that happen. Great suggestion. Any other comments? All right. Any Akapai DidCom v2 adoption updates? I know there was a PR in for this. This is not yesterday. That was whenever I wrote that. Any other updates on the Akapai PR for DidCom v2 initial adoption?
Just that it's sort of still in review, and yeah, they're trying to figure out, I guess, whether or not to merge that or not.
Okay. Cool.
It's only the initial, we can parse messages and respond to them, but it's a starting point.
Right, yeah, for sure. Well, and having a starting point integrated means that it's a little easier to do the next steps too. So cool. Okay, so Interopathon, I kind of already touched on a little bit. I think that would be really cool. Part of the question is when. It certainly needs to be post-spring conference season and with enough of a delay in the targets that we can actually, have a decent chance of success at the things that we're trying to demonstrate. This would be a virtual event. In the past, it's been a couple hours long with people coming when they can. And we have an agenda published in advance about what's happening. Usually there's a little bit of an opening presentation that kind of scopes like what's actually happening. Then we have working sessions where folks are on different teams are directly working with others to demonstrate a path that we've identified in advance. And then debugging this is a safe place for debugging to happen and for things like that to occur. And then often, like the next day, it's a good idea to have a close-up where we actually get back together with a summary of things demonstrated, learned, etc., so that folks can kind of keep a status on that. So that's a virtual event. No one's traveling. But ideally, choosing a time when the most amount of people can attend, which is always a struggle, is a good idea. They tend to have, in the past, have been in the morning-ish to be a little bit more European friendly. And so that's certainly an aspect there. The Interopathon that we're discussing now is kind of a little bit DIDCOM and DIDCOM protocol focused. There's As an Aries project, there's also a lot of utility in us demonstrating other protocols that are supported. So for example, if it was worth demonstrating cross-project support of OpenID protocols, for example, that's a perfectly acceptable thing to do. There's sometimes other venues for that to also occur, which is great. But if we find that it would be useful for our community to do this, then there's absolutely nothing wrong with roping in and demonstrating things, developed, designed, hosted elsewhere. As part of that process. It's also intended to be open, meaning you don't have to have Aries in your name of your project in order to be involved, but those that are seeking sort of compatibility across the identified things. For Credo is the obvious example here, but also Verimo, which is a diff code project, and so the idea is to coordinate across those events. We can host it. It could be co-hosted if that would be useful for somebody, but the important thing is that it happens and that we get together and we demonstrate and learn stuff, right? So that's the idea there. I think we might be a little too light on numbers to really organize stuff today, but I'll keep bringing it up because I think that this is something that would be really beneficial for the community in the time frame of this summer. So within the next month or two. Cool. Here's the mediated reconfig notes as well, and that would be nice to get sort of finished, even if we don't have a pushing feature for adoption or it's not an urgent problem. I think that declaring this would be useful so that people implementing it can have some time to do so, and we'll identify it in the future, perhaps in an AIP or something as a targeted version. So that's what we have. Any comments, thoughts, whether it's on the agenda or not, about any topics that we want to discuss today? We've got, looks like 10 minutes left. It can also be done early. Fully acceptable. All right, I think early is the game plan. I'm grateful for the discussion today. There's some cool stuff and some good work going on. Please keep up the good work, and I hope your week is a great one. And we will see. Oh, I should probably give a little bit of update on EIC. Let me do that for a few minutes. Is that okay? Aries was only mentioned once specifically, and it was on a slide where AIP2 was referenced. But that's not uncommon. This is not a developer conference as so much as it's a business-oriented conference. So the fact that AIP2 was actually listed on a slide with interoperability targets was pretty cool. DIDCOM was mentioned far more than I had expected it to be. I of course mentioned it in the stuff. Steve and I did a session on post-quantum cryptography. And its impacts on decentralized identity, and so a section there was talking about the impacts on DIDCOM, but DIDCOM itself was brought up in several different places, including, and this was not mentioned, but was used in a really cool demo done by eSatis. And we've known that there have been fans of DIDCOM before, but this was a new project that was using it, which was very cool, dealing with credentials for qualification in the construction industry, which was quite neat. And it was brought up in a handful of useful things. The OpenID DIDCOM work under work at the ID Union with a group in ID Union was well received. That was given as a quick part of a demonstration in a session that Steve McCowan and Kim Hamilton Duffy were doing about sort of just intro to these technologies. That was super well attended on the first sort of pre-day of the conference, and so I gave a demo there, and that was well received and heard good things about it. But again, A lot of there are nerds there, but a significant number of the people that are there at this conference are business folks. And so the takeaway they took was that, oh, these things can work together rather than the details of the protocol. And so that was quite good as well. And so that work continues in a nice way. Steve, any other observations from the conference that are relevant here?
No, just that one thing that has really changed in the conference from preceding years is there's a super strong focus on decentralized identity. So that's defined as very related to everything that we're doing. There's a few variations, whether it's OpenID or different flavors, but decentralized identity as a larger group was a main presence in the conference.
Yeah, I forgot to mention that. So last year there was like 6 sessions that were relevant to decentralized identity and VCs and stuff. I mean, I'm guessing at the number, but it was a small number. This year, on the opening keynote and the main stage, Martin Kuppinger of Kuppinger Cole, like the main dude, got up and said decentralized identity is the future. And so they had picked sessions in accordance with that vision, and so there was a whole lot of relevant going on. And so that was quite good. I expect that for the next year or two that will continue to be true. It may be true longer than that, but that it will be continue to be true with a focus on kind of what's happening and projects and all of that stuff. So that was cool. Any questions?
Well, if it's the future, I sure hope it goes on longer than that.
Me too, but I've also been involved with analysts and stuff long enough to know that sometimes their attention gets distracted. So the conference focus is what I was meaning will continue for at least the next 2 years, even though this work will continue on and never, ever, ever die until it dominates the universe. Cool. Anyway, brief update, but hopefully that was helpful. Cool. Well, I think we're done today. Thanks everyone for coming. Grateful for your work and look forward to future conversations and happenings. I hope your week is a great one.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.